doing air traffic controller signs.
There he is.
He's here.
She wants right on time.
Oh, she's, all right. Folks, just want to let you know, we'll get started here in just a second. We try to start promptly at 3:30, but we just have a quick little technical thing we're working on here, and we will get started. So bear with us for just a moment. All right, it looks like we are set. All right, I call the St. Paul City Council to order. Roll call.
Prince. Tao.
Here.
Tolbert.
Here.
Yang.
Here.
Jalali.
Here.
Naker.
Here.
Council President Brenmoen.
Here.
6 present, 1 absent, being Jane Prince. All right, consent agenda items 3 through 17 are before you for your consideration.
And I'll have to hold up just 1 second. If you'd like, folks, please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here, folks. I have to tell you, it is really exciting for us to see a room full of people. It's been 2 years. So thanks. It's important for us to be back in public and to be able to interact with our community members face to face. We still have online options, so we do have people that will be calling in today to testify as well. One thing, if COVID has taught us nothing, it is that flexibility is good. And so we will hear from people over the airwaves as well as here in person. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This building no longer has an enforced mask mandate. The council has chosen to opt to continue to wear our masks, especially at the council table. We encourage you to do the same. There are masks on the table. There's also hand sanitizer. So thank you for your consideration on that matter. We appreciate it. We will have several public hearings today. When we go to public hearings, we will first entertain comments from people who are here in the room. So especially if you're ready to leave after you make your comments, you can do that. People who are waiting on the phone will get second cut at comments. Post-COVID world, we're just having people speak for 2 minutes or less on a subject, as opposed to anyone who was here in the past. We used to kind of try to divide up the time evenly, and I don't think it worked that great. So having 2 minutes certainly doesn't give you a ton of time to share. Just a reminder that your public testimony here in front of us is wonderful and appreciated, but you can also submit additional comments through email, through phone, through direct conversations with your council members. So don't feel like because you only had 2 minutes here today that you can't get the rest of your comments heard. You'll just have to use a different format for that. I often say at the beginning of these council meetings that our goal is to make sure the people who testify last get the same courtesy and attention as the people who testify first. So we're all kind of in this together, respecting each other's time and making sure that we get through the testimony so we can hear what people have to say. There are several public hearings today that we will not vote after we hear a public testimony. Sometimes it's a little bit awkward because we hear passionate testimony and the council members hear you, but we don't interact, and then the following week is when we vote to pass an ordinance. So I think on a couple particular items where we have a lot of testimony, we will not be voting today because procedurally we have to have 3 readings for our ordinances. So that's a little kind of so we're all on the page information, and with that, I will say that we have a guest reader here today. So there's a lot of things that are new, and bear with us, but we're excited to have Mr. Bastian here to be our guest city clerk reader. So let's get the party started.
Consent agenda items 3 through 17 are before you for your consideration.
All right. Is there anything on consent that should be taken separately?
Would like to take number 3 separately. Thank you.
All right, item 3 will be heard separately. Anything else on separate consideration from consent? Seeing none, Ms. Jalali moves the balance of consent. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, none opposed. The consent agenda pass as amended.
No, 6 in favor. All right, so so that is a consent agenda, and we will now hear item number 3 separately.
Item 3 on the consent agenda, heard separately, is Resolution 22-82, accepting the grant from the U.S. Department of Justice distributed through the Community-Oriented Policing Services Program via the FY 2021 hiring program.
All right, and on this item, we do have Mr. McCarthy from the Office of Financial Services on the line if we would like a staff report in advance of any questions. All right, is that true, Mr. Jalali?
I would greatly appreciate a staff report, yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. McCarthy, thank you for being here on Teams. And just hold up one second. Want to make sure our media services has you up. We see you on the screen. And are you muted or?
This is muted.
We can't hear you through the audio. It should be up
I muted the speakers.
Ms. House just went to talk to media services. You want to test again? John, can you say hello again, and let's see if we can hear you?
Hello, council members.
Yep.
John McCarthy, can you hear me? Great.
Yep, we got you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Great, no problem. Council President Brenmo and council members, the resolution that is in front of you today would accept the COPS grant that would allow us to hire an additional 30 officers over the period, over the amount where staffing was at the time of the application. So the grant application was submitted when current payroll was at 589. So the additional 30 officers that are authorized through the grant would actually bring us up to 619, which is our current sworn authorized count. Accepting the grant today does not lock us in for 30. It allows us to go up to 30 officers, and also highlighting that we have had an extension granted to us from the Department of Justice for accepting this grant already, and the end of March is our current deadline for accepting this grant. So with this being the last council meeting before the end of the month, this is our last opportunity to accept the grant.
Great, thank you. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, we're accepting the grant today. It authorizes us to pay for officers up to our existing sworn strength. This does not preclude a community process. We just need to accept the grant today because we're running out of runway. But those resources have some flexibility, and we can work with the community and with the council on the shape of those dollars beyond today's passage of just accepting these monies.
Council President, that's correct. This gives us the flexibility to plan out our hiring academies for the current academy that was just launched, where the postings just went live last month, and then also the plan for the second academy as the council added to the 2022 budget this year. So we have the opportunity to plan, and it gives us kind of maximum flexibility on accepting these outside dollars leveraged along with our ARP federal dollars. This gives us, as you noted, a long runway to figure out a new staffing model and to pilot that model over the duration of the grant period.
Great, thank you. Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. So when we passed our budget at the end of last year, it included funds for additional academies, and it was my understanding that they would simply do that work. They would have the extra academy and they would work to actually have a hiring cycle for the police department that means that every following city budget cycle, we have more appropriate information about staffing to make changes. So the confusion I have is how this item relates to that, because in the resolution text, there's a lot of information about, one whereas says we can continue to do community engagement with, it's literally saying things like children receiving toys at Christmas, kids' bikes being repaired, fellowship and community over plate of hot dogs and hamburgers. Like, it's clear that this is going to something different. So if our city budget process already gave us what we needed to do that work, and this doesn't talk about that in the resolution, what is the connection between this grant and what we're saying it's for? That is the thing that I'm having trouble understanding, and I would appreciate, the phrase I wrote down is, this gives us flexibility to plan out our hiring academies. I thought we already did that in our budget. That's what I don't understand.
Sure, Council President Brenmo, Councilmember Jalali, with this, by having these additional resources, it allows us to hire above where we would have been able to with the current budget allocation. It's additional outside money that, when leveraged with our ARP, gives us broader flexibility, meaning we could hire, to a level above 619, given pending retirements, which is similar to what the fire department does, or pilot different hiring models that we would not have been able to do with just our own funding source. So again, it gives us this 3-year timeline to try a different funding and operational and hiring and staffing model that is different from the previous models where we did 1 academy a year and fell pretty dramatically off of our authorized strength. This would keep us closer to that 619 authorized strength year round.
As a follow-up, Director McCarthy, and then if other people have questions, I can certainly give them time for that. Since this is a one-time grant and we're using it to hire on new officers, my concern is that we are committing ourselves to a longitudinal city cost with our taxpayer dollars by hiring staff that aren't accounted for longitudinally. This is just a federal grant helping us get these funds. So how can we make sure this isn't adding tails and long-time officers that we don't currently have the funds to pay for if we're accepting it?
Council President Brenmo and Council Member Jalali, that it was one of my main concerns as well as the finance director, and working with the police department to minimize the long-term impact. And by matching up our ARP dollars with this grant, it gives us that 3-year window to get us back to 619, and also plan over that 3-year horizon to either, as a community, phase off of those grant resources to minimize the long-term tails, or if the community and elected decision makers opt, we could phase on to permanent city funding for that same level. So it gives us the ability to develop those options over this multi-year timeframe to try this approach and figure out if we either are going to phase off those grant dollars completely and go back to a previous staffing model, or add back with city resources phased out over this 3-year timeline. So it gives us, again, a long runway that we'd never have on a given kind of annual budget cycle to be able to pair up these two outside sources to figure out a long-term strategy. And it works well with, timeline of a new chief coming in, that this is a model that we'd be able to outline with new leadership and figure out what that long-term staffing looks like.
Okay, I appreciate you answering that. For now, I'll yield if other people have questions.
And again, this is accepting the grant, not accepting how we will spend it. Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. And I appreciate the question from Council Member Jalali, but I'm definitely going to support this item with the amount of carjacking that we continue to have in the city. And right now, the Cadillac converter theft are shooting the car owner that are going out there to confront these thieves. And then, a couple of weeks ago, I have the block from my house, they found a dead body in the alley. And it was because of our St. Paul investigative work that was able to apprehend the suspect. And then also a couple of weeks ago at the El San Mosque, there was a burglary over there, vandalism, and they stole documents, and they also stole a safe. And when I was having conversation with the Somali American community, I mean, they were very fearful of what happened and felt really violated. And so I think that's why it's important for us to have appropriate number of investigator and officer to work these crimes. And so I think this is with the new chief coming in, I think that the chief should be able to have the type of resource he needs to have a force that can serve the city of St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. Other comments or questions on this, or I guess I will take that as a motion for Mr. Tolbert. Any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Tao. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Jalali.
I guess I respect the motion. I plan to vote no on this item. I'm concerned about how this grant was applied for without more oversight. We passed an ordinance to make sure that in the future departments would not go and apply for significant amount of federal funds like this before having it come through us so that there's clear understanding. I appreciate that there was shared concern around the longitudinal impacts financially, and I'm just not convinced that this is the right process or way to meet our community safety needs right now. I think if we were able to put this $4 million into community programs that are preventing the very things we're asking police officers to respond to, it would be a better use of funds, and I plan to vote no, so thank you.
Any other discussion? Ms. Yang.
Thanks, Council President. I'm not sure if John's still on the screen there, but
He's here.
Okay. John, I did want to express to you how important it would have been to do a briefing with council members about this. I mean, this was something that was sort of in the pipeline. I personally heard about what the original grant was for, and it did not support it. I feel like there needs to be a lot of study done around what our maximum authorized strength number is, and that was something that I brought up before, and I don't know exactly whether that type of study is happening. But the reason why a briefing would have been really important around this is because if the original grant proposal wasn't what you all are intending the money to be used for anymore, but it's still included in the public documents, it's going to be so confusing for the public who are reviewing all these materials. They're going to come to us for questions, and even we will have questions ourselves too, and that's exactly how I experienced this. So moving forward, I think it'd be really, really important for any documents that are attached to agenda items to be relevant instead of having outdated information that might really skew how things really are and what the council will be voting on. Now, another thing that I want to mention too is how important it would have been to really allow time for our community members to weigh in on something so important like this. $3.75 million is a lot of money, and all of us here know how important it is, how important it is for us to be really affirming and listening to the lived experience of our communities of color, our immigrant refugee communities, about what community safety looks like to them. And I am very concerned about how if this grant was approved, how we would work to include our communities that are hurting most into that process. Not really sure what that accountability will look like moving forward and how we will make sure that money will be used the way that it's supposed to. So that's a concern that I have. The other thing is that today is the deadline for us to vote on this. So even if we were to lay this item over to allow for our community members to weigh in on this, it doesn't seem like we even are able to. And that I was very interested in getting a 2-week or even 3-week layover on this, but was told that that's not something that we can do. And so I'm really disappointed in that. I really feel that this should have been done a much better way and differently as well. And so with all of that, I will not be supporting the vote today.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a motion from Mr. Tao. Any further discussion? On this item, we will do a roll call. So roll call.
Tao.
Aye.
Tolbert.
Yes.
Yang.
No.
Jalali.
No.
Naker.
Aye.
Council President Brendan.
Aye.
It's 4 in favor, 2 opposed, being Yang and Jalali. The motion is adopted. Item 18 before you now for discussion is Resolution 22-463, approving the new precinct boundaries and polling locations for 2022 as a result of redistricting.
And I know Mr. Triplett from Ramsey County is in the house. I realize I do have a question for you after I said I might not, so if we could get you to come up. For people watching this at home or in the chambers, last week the Charter Commission approved new ward boundaries following the state legislative boundaries being decided by the court system. And so the last step of redistricting includes the City Council approving new precinct boundaries that accommodate the changes in the wards, as well as affirming or changing polling locations for 2022. And the information is attached in Legistar. This last step of the process, I know some people have asked, like, if we have control over ward lines or how this goes down, and really it's precinct lines that we choose and polling locations, and they actually can be changed and improved anytime. So if these polling locations that we're about to approve here today prove to be poor, we can change them. But I think one of the goals was to keep precincts as pretty much as uniform as they were prior to redistricting as possible, just so that people knew where their voting locations were. So on this item, my question for you, Mr. Triplett, was simply, how do people learn about their new polling locations or their new ward boundaries, for that matter? I'm not sure what system is in place to let people know, whoops, you had this council member, now you don't, or now you have a different legislative district, or you vote in a different location. Any insight on how we notify our community members?
Yeah, Councilmember Brenman and the rest of the council members, thank you for having me here today. To answer your specific questions, how do we notify voters of their polling place changes, and how do voters find out about all the other changes that might impact them because of redistricting? Redistricting is affecting the federal offices, so your congressional members, all the way down to city council, school district, and park and rec districts, if you have those like they have in Minneapolis. All voters in Ramsey County and across the state in the early June will receive a little, it's traditionally blue. The state has said they are going to make it a new color. We have not been told, but it's called a postal verification card. Those traditionally are blue, and it will tell you where your new polling place is, and it will tell you your new district. So all voters should look for those in early June. Also, the Secretary of State on June 6th will make live the mnvotes.org. Right now, if you were to go to mnvotes.org and go to the polling place finder, it will tell you, here's your current information, but this is going to change soon because of redistricting. They told us around June 6th, or June 9th, excuse me, June 9th, mnvotes.org and the poll finder will be live, and you can find your new congressional reps, your new legislative reps, your local offices, your school district offices, and any other new information. Ramsey County will also work with the 16 municipalities in the county to provide social media messaging, to provide website content, and to provide any city-specific information cities would request.
Great, that's great. David Triplett, we forgot to introduce you in the beginning, is in charge of the elections at Ramsey County. So thank you for that information. The other question I had was, when does it become official? I understand that June is when we'll see those postcards and information from the Secretary of State, but have the districts already changed? The wards in the city of St. Paul, rather?
Yeah, so technically the wards were, or Councilmember Brenman and the rest of the council, technically the wards were approved by your city's charter commission. I believe that was last Wednesday, the 16th. And then before you today, is your duty to establish the precinct boundaries and the polling places. So I believe the current ward maps are attached to this resolution. So for members of the public who are interested in seeing those are available. And then obviously after your action here today, the polling places and precinct boundaries will be made official as well. They just won't be available on the state's website until, again, June 9th.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. I'm just curious, when you guys were trying to figure out where all the polling places are, how much consideration do you give to folks who are who have a mobility issue and who are aging?
Great. Council Member Brenman, Council Member Tao. I believe the question was how much do we take account for accessibility issues, making sure polling places are accessible. I can provide to the council our survey we use to survey any polling place in Ramsey County. It includes the Department of Justice accessibility standards. So those are things like, does the polling place have a parking spot that can assist the van? Is there is the ramp not less than a certain degree into the polling place? Is the route clearly accessible? Does the door have a paddle on it? So, you just got to press the button. And there's, I believe, 75 questions in the survey that relate to accessibility. And then we review. Once you accept the polling places today, my staff will go out with this survey like we do every year, and we review for these standards. And if a polling place does not meet these standards, or if a voter brings this to our attention, we will work with the council member in that ward as well as the city clerk to try and identify a new location. And so I know in your experience here, Councilmember Tao, we have come back to you and said, hey, here's a list of polling places that either don't meet our standards or are no longer available, and here would be our recommendation. So we're annually reviewing these, but with 86 precincts in the city of St. Paul, that's a lot of buildings to find. So we always encourage folks, if they have good suggestions for what they think would be a really good polling place for those neighborhoods, to definitely bring those to our attention. But we do survey every location annually to make sure it meets the federal government's accessibility standards, as well as the ones we believe also need to be met, just from what we hear from voters. We have almost 100,000 voters in this city, and we hear from them. And we want to take into account their suggestions when we select the polling places.
Thank you.
Wow, that's great. And again, reminder to and folks who are here, if the polling place doesn't seem to measure up in terms of accessibility, please let us know. 86 is quite a few to manage, and we rely on people's reports to help us do the best job possible. Thank you for your hard work on this. I know it's been a big lift finishing this up, and so I want to acknowledge and appreciate your efforts to get this to us in good shape. We appreciate it very much.
Great, you're very welcome.
I'll take a motion from Mr. Tao. Any further comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, 0 opposed. The resolution is adopted. Item 19 is before you now for final adoption. It's Ordinance 22-13, granting the application of Jonathan L. Ferricci to rezone property at 1296 Hudson Road from OS Office Service to B2 Community Business, and amending Chapter 60 of the Legislative Code pertaining to the zoning map.
All right, and this item had its public hearing last week, so we vote today. I'll take a motion from Ms. Yang. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, 0 opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item 20 is before you as a public hearing. Ordinance 22-12, establishing the minimum qualifications for the vacancy for the position of police chief pursuant to the provisions of Section 8.01A of the Administrative Code and Section 12.12.1 of the St. Paul City Charter.
All right, and this is before us for final vote, assuming there are no additional changes today, but we did make adjustments last week, so we continued the public hearing to this week to hear any testimony, to make adjustments as necessary. Again, these are establishing the minimum qualifications. It is not the job posting. It is not the interview questions. It's just basic minimums required in order to start a search process. So this is a public hearing. If there's anyone here intending to speak to this item, now is your opportunity. And as you're walking up, come on up. Please introduce yourself. Let us know where you live. And when you're done speaking, sign the ledger up at there's one on either side of the dais, and you can just sign in. That is how we keep track of who spoke, and it becomes part of the official public record. But if you can just introduce yourself and give us where you live before you share your 2 minutes of testimony.
Uh, President Brenneman, member of the council, my name is Tyrone Terrell. I live 1522 Waterloo, actually in West St. Paul, so not in St. Paul. I'm president of the African American Leadership Council. I'm here with Reverend Thomas from the St. Paul Black Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance. As you all know, I sent you a letter probably a week or so ago from our council, but also on behalf of the Alliance, St. Paul branch of the NAACP, expressing our concerns that the qualifications would limit those that are qualified in our department, not only within the St. Paul Police Department, but throughout the metropolitan area. As they were written, there's only 2 African American candidates that would be eligible. That would be Commissioner Harrington, who's not going to apply for it and who will probably retire after his term as commissioner. And then Booker is taking the job as the Bloomington chief. And so for our organizations and our community, the most important job in St. Paul for us is the chief of police. Our community is the most impacted by crime. Our community has been the most impacted by police shootings. And so it makes that position crucial for us in terms of who's going to be the next chief. More so than the mayor, more so than any of you, that position we have the most contact with. At a minimum, probably 10 to 15 times a month that we're either with the chief or somebody from his office. And so it's extremely important for us that every candidate be allowed the opportunity. I was told by an official that it could be a 20-year sergeant who's just as qualified to be chief if given the opportunity. And so it's not just about the senior commanders, it's not just about the commanders, but giving those that are qualified to be our next chief is important to our community.
Thank you. And did you mention where you lived?
Yes. Reverend Thomas, you want him?
I'm James Thomas. I live at 850 Laurel here in St. Paul.
Great.
I'm the president of the St. Paul Black Ministerial Alliance. I'm the former president. We do want to have a person who is connected to our community. We want everybody who has an opportunity to, or rather we want everyone who has qualifications in terms of connection with the community, experience and whatnot, to have a fair chance to apply. So we ask you to reconsider this, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be sure you sign in and include your address. Great. Is there anyone else here to testify on this item? Ma'am, are you here to testify on this item?
I am, yes. Oh, where should I get? Hi, thank you. Dear Council President Brendan Moen and members of the City Council, my name's Elaine Ayer. I live at 530 Fairview Avenue South in Ward 3. I'm a member of the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, St. Paul chapter. They're also known as MICA. I'm here today to ask you to vote yes on the ordinances 22-15 and 22-16.
All right. Can we have you pause for a moment? That is not the item that's in front of us. So let's wrap up on the item that's in front of us. And when we call the item you're here to testify about, we'll call you back up.
Oh, so we're not here yet?
Nope.
Sorry.
But you got your introduction out of the way.
Okay, thanks.
Rip the Band-Aid off. Okay. So let us continue with item number 20, ordinance 2212. Any discussion on this before we move to a vote? Ms. Naker.
Thanks so much, Council President. And I just wanted to thank those who came to testify today and for submitting testimony in advance. And I know that partly because of your testimony that you shared in advance, that changes were made to open up significantly the minimum qualifications. And I think that was a really wise suggestion and a really smart move to make that amendment. So at this point, there is no longer any number of sworn personnel that have to have been supervised. This is open to anyone having supervised any number, any size of department. And I think that is a really important change. We need to cast as broad a net as possible, as you both mentioned, and see who's able to come forward. So I think that's a good change, and I appreciate your weighing in.
Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. Mr. Tyrone and Tyrone Terrell and Reverend Thomas, thank you for your leadership, for pushing through this issue. I know that in the beginning, this is not where we're at, and your consistent push for this has gotten us here. So I really appreciate not just your leadership today, but your leadership in the community. And to your point, this is the most important position for the African American community, and I just want to let you know that how much we appreciate your leadership in the community. All the issues that we've dealt with, I'm always appreciative that you two are always there trying to de-escalate and bring peace to the community. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Other comments? And this is a reminder that we are also, the council is soliciting applications for the Police Chief Selection Committee, and that group will look at applications and advance 5 resumes to the mayor. They are able to they have some flexibility in terms of their community engagement on the work of the selection committee as well. The applications close on Friday, end of day. Is that correct? I'm looking at you, Ms. House. Friday, end of day? Thursday. I'm gonna make sure I say this right because I have said it wrong about 9 times.
Yes, Thursday.
Thursday,
at
end
5
of
p.m.
Thursday at midnight?
5 p.m.
Okay, Thursday, end of business. So if you have interest in serving on the police selection committee, you have until tomorrow, end of business, to apply. I think we have about 50 people who've expressed interest so far. A great group applicant pool, but we would, there's many ways to participate. And in addition to the selection committee, which is a more formal part of the process, we know that the mayor is intending to do community forums, meetings where we can engage with the candidates in addition. So there'll be lots of opportunities for community to participate. So with that in front of us, Mr. Tao moves approval on this ordinance 1222. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, 0 opposed. The public hearing is closed and the ordinance is adopted. Item 21 is before you now as a public hearing, ordinance 22-15, amending section 13.02 of the Administrative Code, establishing duties in the Department of Safety and Inspections related to rent stabilization.
All right, and this item, we had a staff report last week. I don't know if it'd be helpful to have a recap of that, but essentially, this is our establishing responsibilities in the city related to the work around rent stabilization. When we have ordinance 15 and 16 that are both related to the rent stabilization initiative. We'll ask you to keep your testimony to the item that's in front of us. And this one is establishing duties in the Department of Safety and Inspections and related to rent stabilization. I'll call for people who are in the audience to testify first. We do have some callers on the line that will follow people who are here in person. So if you're here, come on up. And we have a kind of a sense of what our timing looks like. And remember, it's 2 minutes. Make sure you tell us your name, where you live, and sign in when you're done testifying. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council President Brandon and council members. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Shay Freeberg. I'm a resident of the Midway and a longtime labor organizer in the Twin Cities. I am thankful for Councilmember Jalali's work to move Ordinance 2215, an important step forward that will allow the Department of Public Safety and Inspections to assume necessary duties related to the implementation of rent stabilization. On November 2nd, over 30,000 St. Paul voters came together across race, class, and zip code because we wanted this specific policy in our toolkit to keep St. Paul home for everyone in this city. Because of that, we're no longer talking about if we should implement rent stabilization. Now we're talking about how. It has been over 4 months since rent stabilization was passed, and we have just over 1 month until May 1st. There's no room for delay. The time is now to get started on actually investing resources and staff time into implementation structure. I trust and have faith in DSI DSI, and partnering departments to move forward with rulemaking. But they must be given instructions to do so. We cannot go in circles where you expect results and details without assigning any actionable responsibility. This ordinance cannot wait. As voters, we demand action. Renters need protections, and everyone in our city will benefit from creating the structure. Please honor the will of the voters and pass this ordinance today. Thank you.
And before you get going, I do want to just say, and this is not to contradict you, sir, but we will not be voting on it today. And it's not because there's not support at this table. It is because it's the second reading. So just so people are testifying know that this is one of those two items that we will not be able to vote on today. But I do know that there's broad support. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, council members and council president. My name is Ann Schulman. I live in Ward 4, Miriam Park, and I'm here to encourage City Council to vote yes for Ordinance 2215 and 16. I believe the city should invest city money and time and resources into making sure that rent stabilization is implemented. We can all agree that we need to invest in our communities, and this is a vital way to do that. We need to finish implementing rent stabilization by May 1st. Without these ordinances, we can't do that, and many renters will continue to be left with no protection. The longer we wait to implement this policy, the more harm is being done, especially to BIPOC households, in addition to the overall community. As a frontline healthcare worker with a 0% salary increase, I have had a 9% increase in my rent in the last few months, and I'm here to testify that we need actions towards implementing rent stabilization, and we need it now. Renters in our community are asking for equity, stability, and predictability. We must honor that and invest city resources and money into making this happen. I voted to make sure rent stabilization passed. I did my part. I am now asking the City Council to do theirs and truly invest in our communities that need it the most. These ordinances create a pathway for clarity and equity. So I hope we can all move forward with this with urgency. I know that implementation is complicated, but we should always move forward with the will of the voters in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. Finally here. Hello, my name is Clara Ware. I live in Ward 7, Precinct 7, District 6, and I live at 1276 Wilson. And so I'm here today to talk about the reason why I think you should implement the rent stabilization policy. The first reason that I think that we need to invest into our communities as soon as possible so that renters can afford to stay in their housing. The second point I would like to make is we need clarity and understanding on legal terms in order to move forward in a true democracy. The third point I would like to address is that these two ordinances will create a pathway for rent stabilization policy to be productive and lead to a much stronger rent policy that would address the barriers of the housing crisis, homelessness, and gentrification in communities of color. I would like to see the rent stabilization deadline to be met by May the 1st to ensure that renters are not going to be evicted and be displaced because of outrageous rent hikes, and also to ensure that renters have a place to be called home. How can renters pay their rent? From me having a conversation, my story, from me having a conversation with the renters last year and this year, some renters are already over the 3% margin. And the renters are already telling us that on top of the rent hikes, they are paying all utility, rent, lights, gas, water, garbage, and sewage. So that ups the rent to about $2,000 a year. What I would like to say, $2,000, sorry, $2,000 a month. What I would like to say to the City Council that I've been working on a housing initiative for 3 years now. I have hardly seen any investments. And what I would like to say today, if these families become displaced in homelessness, we will see a spike in homelessness, right? So I would like to say that it is each of you guys' duty to make sure that you invest in each community, because I did door knock on the west side, the east side, Frogtown, Rondo, and greater Minnesota, and the same situations. And the last comment I would like to make, why would somebody pay a mortgage for a landlord? Why would somebody pay rent to a place that has conditions that a human shouldn't be living in? So I would urge all of you to pass this implementation of this policy May the 1st, so we can start investing in people and in communities where people won't be able to be homeless.
Thank you.
But be able to have a place to live. Thank you.
Thank you. And
I appreciate
I am really, I hate being the one that has to cut people off, but
you could cut me off. I said what I meant to say.
I know, but just so people know, that was 2.5 minutes, and we do have 9 people waiting to testify online. So I'm gonna give you the sign when you're getting close to 2. Okay, because we do want to hear everything you have to say. So thanks. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Council President and Council members. My name is B. Rosas. I use they and them pronouns. I was a former resident of the Merriam Park neighborhood, and now I'm in South Minneapolis. I'm here today to testify in favor of Ordinance 2215 and 2216. I believe that these 2 ordinances will allow the rent stabilization policy to be in effect, but it also will give it a chance to actually succeed. I think an argument that we typically like to see is that rent stabilization or other methods just like it don't necessarily succeed in cities like ours, but that's not true if we don't give it a chance. Just like renters gave it a chance this last November when they casted their votes, the City Council must do the same to pass these ordinances so that it could create an amazing path for rent stabilization and thus create a path for a more just city that will be a home for renters in the city of St. Paul. I believe that we are all held accountable to the will of the voters, and I believe that these ordinances will do just that. I think that these 2 ordinances provide clarity and provide a sense of accessibility that not many renters, especially renters who voted this last November, genuinely see when it comes to policy. I think that this policy is very well written, but I think these ordinances will help kind of provide more of what we need from our city leaders and those higher up. So I urge you to please move forward with these 2 ordinances and overall move forward in implementing rent stabilization by May 1st. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Monica Bravo, and I live in Ward 2, District 3. I also work in Ward 2, District 3, and I am here to encourage the passage and moving forward of Ordinance 2215 and 2216. Our ward voted 55.1% in favor of rent stabilization, which is higher than the citywide results, and 80% of precincts voted in favor of rent stabilization. This shows a clear mandate for the policy and a commitment to rent stabilization as a critical step forward for housing justice and racial justice in St. Paul. I'm just asking you to please move forward with this critical next 2 steps so that we can have this implemented by May 1st. Today is March 23rd, and we are 38 days away to implement this policy. We must move this forward now. Thank you.
My name's Elaine Eyre. I live at 530 Fairview Avenue South. I live in Ward 3. I'm a member of Micah St. Paul chapter. I'm here today to ask for your support for ordinances 2215 and 2216. Rent stabilization is an essential step in ensuring that the housing we have stays affordable with reasonable rent increases. Rent stabilization does not tell property owners what to charge. It just regulates the rate of increase once they set the initial rent. The large housing equity gap between whites and people of color in Minnesota is not an accident. It started when racial covenants, redlining, predatory lending, and the destruction of the thriving Rondo community to build I-94 occurred. Black business owners lost their businesses, Black homeowners lost their homes, and were denied the right to live where they wanted once they were displaced. realtors, housing developers, city, council, state, and federal governments, banks, and racist citizens all had a part in this. The impact of the racist policies continue to have a detrimental impact on community of colors today and lower income white people. I know that many of you are against the rent stabilization ordinance that passed in the November 2021 election, but please understand that you are in a position to help right some of these wrongs. Having safe, stable, and affordable housing allows children to stay in the same home and not have to move so many times during the school year. It allows a parent or parents to be able to afford basic needs for their families, like food, clothing, medicine, and gas and maintenance on their car if they own one, or money for public transportation to get to their jobs. Your vote of yes on these two ordinances will help the 83% of black households, many of them living in poverty, and 41% of white households that rent in St. Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Marcus Troy. I live in Ward 2, St. Paul's West Side District. I'm here to basically show you I'm one of your unintended consequences by not supporting this ordinance. I need you to support it because my fourplex got bought in November. I'm now forced to leave. I've been a resident of the West Side since 1972. Okay? When I went to look for a new place, I was notified in November. I was told I need to get out of my fourplex. When I did look for a new place, I was told I need first month, last month, damage deposit, and then another $25 to $75 for background check, $25 to $75 for credit check. I need you to support this ordinance because now we're being displaced. I can't go to St. Paul's East Side. They're experiencing the same thing. Rondo area, Midway. I can't go there. There's no housing, affordable housing. You got a guy like me, disabled, senior, veteran. We're being displaced. So what I'd like for you to do is please support this ordinance. We need your help. We're not sure about all the nuts and bolts with the investors, the developers, but as a renter, as a member of my community, I want to stay in my community. Like many of you, if you're homeowners, I'm pretty sure you don't want to uproot yourselves. My rent in our fourplex went up almost 40%. I did an interview with Pioneer Press in August, and we were just getting this on the ballot. I think out of 30,000 voters, out of the 70,000 renters in St. Paul, I think they pretty much let you guys know what direction you should be going in to support us. I'm asking for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Be sure to sign in. Oh, you can sign in after you testify. I just think there's just in the spirit of expediency, I think it helps. If there's people who are going to testify, can you please stand up because we do have folks waiting online. So I'm trying to kind of get timing. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. My name is Bob Kraft. I live at 100 King Street West in Ward 2. I'm a member of the West Side Community Organization, have been working for the last 5 years to help improve my community. I've lived in the West Side for 34 years, 6 as a renter and now a privileged homeowner with a house paid for. And I've been thinking a lot about what stabilization means. If you're retired like me and spend a lot of time doom scrolling through the New York Times and seeing the imminent changes to the world, you worry about the world you live in. I look across the street from where I live and see empty lots from 3 houses that were torn down and not replaced. There's a duplex on the corner that's been flipped 2 or 3 times. The Dakota family that lived there the longest was evicted in order to make profits for people instead of offering stable housing. We had an ordinance passed to improve security for renters. It was dismissed by this council. You're supposedly going to fix that, but nothing's happened. I know I'm losing faith in democracy when ordinances are passed with the majority. 6 out of 7 wards want to see this happen. We don't want to see it bureaucratically slow-walked or amended or sabotaged. Implement the ordinances to make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council President Brenda Moen, members of the City Council, I want to commend you for having this on the agenda. My name is Bara Berg. I live in Ward 1. I've been a St. Paul resident now for 40 years. I used to live in New York. I experienced rent control there. It worked. It was not the horror story that some members of the investment community would want you to believe. I had friends who were landlords, small landlords. I was not an intimate of Donald Trump's, but they did well. If they had unexpected necessary repairs, things that had to be made, they applied for a rent increase. They got a rent increase, and they had sufficient income from their properties that they survived as landlords and maintained their buildings. Unfortunately, our mayor has shown more speed in finding problems with the law than he has in getting movement toward getting it implemented. So I commend you. We need to get the whatever we call the committee that will handle complaints and enforcement and clarification so that tenants will know where they stand, landlords will know how to get adjustments to rent that would be needed for many of them. The state legislature, the Republicans anyway, are moving rapidly to try and cut us off and deny us the ability to have home rule on this issue. I certainly hope we can block that. And one argument that they're using that I hope you can bear in mind is that we've had a decrease in housing starts, quote, because of our rent stabilization law. Actually, that's a brilliant technique, strategy on their part to just hold off on the starts, to use it as a fear technique. And then they can start up the starts once they can destroy our law. So thank you. I appreciate your attention to this.
Thank you so much. Be sure to, I saw you sign in ahead, so you got this. All right, we're going to switch to folks that are on the phone line. So we'll reach out to Marvelyn Tripp and see if she can help us get our callers on the line.
Thank you, Council President Moen and Council. We currently have 4 of our registered testifiers logged in to testify on Ordinance 22-15. The first caller that we have is Ed Stewart. Ed, you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please press *6 to unmute. State your name and address to begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Stewart. I live at 1900 Goodrich in Ward 3, and I'm a leader with Isaiah. I'm happy to be here. I have faith in democracy, and I think democracy and government work. Last year, the people of St. Paul followed the state law process to move a rent stabilization policy to a ballot initiative. And in November, the people, 30,000 plus of them across race, class, and zip code, voted yes, choosing to build a city where all can have a stable, safe, and affordable place to live. Now it's the government's responsibility to implement that policy to honor the will of the voters. Thankfully, with Councilmember Jalali's leadership, there is an ordinance which delegates that responsibility. This administrative ordinance will put the knowledgeable staff needed to answer the many questions that have arisen and to detail a clean set of rules. Passage of this ordinance is crucial to achieving a May 1st start date. So let's let the work continue. Please vote yes on this ordinance on April 6th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. The next caller we have is Jenny DeLuca. Jenny, you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please press *6 to unmute. State your name and address to begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. I'm Jenny DeLuca. I live at 1736 Laurel Avenue in Ward 4, and I'm a leader with Isaiah. Thank you, Councilmember Jalali, for taking the lead and recognizing the urgency of the situation. I'm asking that you pass Ordinance 2215 on April 6th. On November 2nd, 2021, voters in St. Paul followed the law set forth by the Minnesota legislature, and over 30,000 St. Paul voters chose to exercise their civic duties, joined across race, income, and zip codes to vote yes for rent stabilization. With approval of Ordinance 2215 by the City Council, they will continue to honor these votes. The Department of Safety and Inspections needs that authority to get started on this critical work of administering the rent stabilization ordinance if the May 1st implementation date is to be achieved. There is no room for delay. I believe in DSI and partnering departments' ability to move forward with rulemaking, but they must be given the authority to do the work by this council. I urge you to vote yes on Ordinance 2215 on April 6th. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next caller we have is Betsy Brayman. Betsy, you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please press *6 to unmute. State your name and address to begin your testimony.
Hi, my name is Betsy Brayman, and I live in Highland Park, Ward 3, 1625 Montreal Avenue. I'm also a leader with Isaiah. Last November, voters across race, class, and ward voted in support of rent stabilization with 53% of the vote. I'm excited about our work alongside HENS and other groups to pass one of the strongest rent stabilization policies in the country. We are less than 6 weeks away from implementation. The City Council has a central role in creating the conditions to build the infrastructure to ensure its implementation. Councilmember Jalali, thank you for recognizing the urgency of this situation and putting together these two ordinances. It is exciting that we can give the Department of Safety and Instruction the authority to answer the many questions that have been coming up about implementing rent stabilization. Please respect and honor the will of the voters. Pass Ordinance 2215 on April 6th to amend the city's administrative code to include duties in the DSI related to rent stabilization. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last caller will be Aaron West. Aaron, you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please press *6 to unmute. State your name and address to begin your testimony.
Hello, my name is Erin West. I am a tenant organizer at Homeline. We're based in Bloomington, Minnesota. We're a tenant advocacy organization that serves tenants across the state through our free and confidential legal advice hotline. Today, I'm speaking to the interests of our St. Paul clients to urge City Council to pass ordinances 2215 and 2216 to stand behind the will of St. Paul voters and ensure swift and effective implementation of the rent stabilization ordinance as passed. Since Homeline first began serving St. Paul renters in 2006, our hotline staff has answered hundreds of calls specifically about rent increases from St. Paul callers, with these numbers increasing every year. Since the passage of rent stabilization in November in St. Paul, our hotline has received 87 calls about rent increases from callers in the city. That's close to 3 times the number of calls we received about rent increases in the same time period last cycle. In many of these calls, St. Paul renters asked us if the rent stabilization ordinance could protect them from rent increases they were experiencing at the moment. Many of our callers are low-income renters on the edge of housing instability. Clear implementation of this ordinance cannot wait. As May approaches, Homeline looks forward to clear guidelines from the city on the implementation of rent stabilization so we can fully address the questions and needs of our St. Paul clients. Ordinances 2215 and 16 are critical first steps in this process, and to that end, we urge council members to pass both ordinances 2215 and 16. Additionally, Homeline encourages the city of St. Paul to include fees as part of the definition of rent in Ordinance 2216. Since the election, we received 42 calls about fees from St. Paul callers, up from 27 calls in the same period last cycle. Getting a handle on extraneous fees is one of Homeline's statewide priorities, as these costs add additional, often unregulated burden to renters. We look forward to working with the city on fair and effective implementation of rent stabilization. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Council President Brimmelman and Council. All testifiers for Ordinance 22-15 have testified.
All right, and again, this item is the administrative code establishing duties in the Department of Safety and Inspections related to rent stabilization. And I will look to my colleagues to, as we close our public hearing, just if there are comments from them. So I guess let's start with that. Ms. Naker moves to close the public hearing. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, none opposed. The public hearing is closed and the ordinance is laid over to April 6th for final adoption.
All right, before we move on, are there any of my colleagues have comments to share? And again, this is an item that we will not be voting on today procedurally, but we will on April 6th when we convene again. Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. And because we won't be voting on this today, but because there are so many folks here, I do just want to take the opportunity, first of all, to thank you for coming. It is wonderful to see so many of my Ward 2 friends and neighbors here as well. And I want to thank everyone for showing up. I also want to be clear that I will be voting in favor of this when we vote on April 6th. And I want to also say that I share the frustration that I've heard expressed today about how long it has taken to get clarity on how this ordinance will be implemented according to the will of the voters that they expressed in November. I have heard loud and clear from people who like the ordinance, from people who don't like the ordinance, from people who didn't even know there was an ordinance, that they want to know how this will be implemented and that they need that clarity and that consistency. And it was actually a surprise to me until about a week and a half ago that we needed to give the Department of Safety and Inspections this authority before rules could be created and definitions could be created, because I had been talking with staff who I had thought were writing these rules on an almost weekly basis since November about their progress and about how important I felt it was to get those rules out. So I just want to share that frustration. I don't know why we're within 5 weeks of when this ordinance takes effect. That is not enough time for anyone to prepare for it. And I am glad we're moving ahead today, but I wish we had gotten this done a lot earlier.
Yeah, and I truly appreciate your comments to that regard, and want folks here to be clear. The council is not delaying this process. We've been asking in September, in October, November, after this vote passed, again, seeking clarity for tenants, for land, for property owners, just to communicate to our community members what was in front of us, and to establish a system in which to create the rules, in which to create the communication, education, and outreach. So this is late. We agree. And we are working as quickly as we can to pass it because we want the same answers and clarification that folks in here have been asking for. So I too plan to vote for this, but it is, the delay is certainly not due to this council, who has been eager to establish these roles, to establish a budget, to establish a plan. So just want to make sure that that is abundantly clear to folks. This questions have been asked repeatedly with our role as council members in a weak, strong mayor system. We cannot establish these roles in the different departments without a cooperation from the administration. Ms. Jalali.
I'd personally like to thank everyone who came out and feel really encouraged by the very overwhelming support for us to keep moving forward. Thank you. There has been pushback, there has been frustration, there has been all the things that happen when power shifts in our community and is more centered on the most vulnerable people in our city who need protections. And I think our job as the council, and I do feel we are united behind that, is to make sure we follow through, create this thoughtfully, and make sure we set up the systems we need. One thing that hasn't been said, or that I know is shared but hasn't been said, is it's really evident, and I have personally been very grateful to have gotten to work with so many of you in these months to support people through the unknown. Homeline, I wrote down what they said, that there have been 87 calls since November reporting rent hikes and wanting to figure out how we can support people. Organizations like Housing Justice Center, Housing Equity Now St. Paul, which is a coalition group that is connected to lots of different tenant protection supporters. You've been fielding so many kind of frontline requests, and I think it's important that while you're here and representatives of that group are here, that we thank you for that, because we're doing this together. We're trying to do this together, and as we pass the DSI admin ordinance on April 6th, one point I want to make about that is we passed funding last week to hire on a team of folks who are going to do this work, and it's just the beginning. In reality, every single hour, every single day, we're going to learn how to keep implementing this better. And I know that you'll be a part of that process as much as you have been, to keep sharpening it, learning from it, improving it, and making sure that renters get what they need in our community. So I wanted to just underscore that and to say thank you. It means a lot that you came out today, and keep up the fight, and appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Yang.
Thanks, Council President. I also want to say thank you to the folks who came and testified today, especially those who were renters and shared about their stories around displacement. And wanted to just say that what happened to you is not okay. It's unacceptable. And I'm hopeful that through our ordinance here, we will be able to work to make sure that no one in our city has to experience that. So thank you for your courage in coming and sharing your story today.
Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. I want to thank everyone for coming down today and share your testimony. It's really important. A lot of time your story is not heard. A lot of time what we hear is folks who have the resources to tell their story. So it's really important that you all are here today. And I will be voting in support of this. It's just that on the 6th, I will not be here, but I want you to know that I support this and continue to work with the city to make sure that this ordinance works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tao. Other comments? All right, so this item has been laid over till the 6th of April for final reading and passage.
Item 23 is now before you as a public hearing. Resolution 22-55, approving
22.
Oh, okay. My apologies. Item 22 is now before you as a public hearing. Ordinance 22-16, amending Chapter 193A of the Legislative Code to define certain terms contained therein and ensure consistency of language used throughout.
All right, and we again had a staff report on this item last week, and expecting that there may be fine tuning on these terms. I know there is a version 2 in Legistar currently, and I will turn it over to Mr. Tolbert to introduce version 2 before the public hearing. Mr. Tolbert.
Yeah, there's a version 2, and the change is pretty minor, and so I'll read it. It's on G for the definition of rent, and I believe this is a friendly amendment for Councilmember.
And Mr. Tolbert, can you just, while you're reading that, can you just come a little bit closer with your mic? We're having a hard time hearing you.
It's a change in the definition of rent, and I believe this is a friendly amendment, and so I'm going to read it just because it's short and concise, and I think actually will be better for understanding and use. The definition would be all monetary consideration charged or received by a landlord concerning the use or occupancy of a rental unit pursuant to a rental agreement. And so that would be an amendment to G, rent, and I'll read it one more time. It's in Legistar's version 2. Rent, all monetary consideration charged or received by a landlord concerning the use or occupancy of a rental unit pursuant to a rental agreement. And that's it.
All right, so that's version 2 in Legistar, and this is offered as a friendly amendment. Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. I appreciate that from Councilmember Tolbert. I heard from multiple council colleagues that the base language needed to be simpler, and so I've worked with those council members and my peers to come up with the same thing substantively but simpler. I also want to just call attention to there are definitions of rent in multiple communities around the country that are also implementing rent stabilization policies. The amendment that Councilmember Tolbert is proposing is very similar to, it's especially similar to two of them, one from Oakland, California, and one from Washington, D.C. And I want to thank and make the connection to Kira, who is helping our city right now through this process with their expertise as a academic and institutional research hub for rent stabilization and rent control policies. They also include knowledge of best practices like this, and these are definitions that I was able to obtain from learning from them what they know other communities do. So I just want to reiterate that because I know that we are working to bring in the best knowledge from the policymakers around this table, community members advocating and testifying here, and then also we're not doing this alone, and we're not the first community to have this policy. So that is some additional context I thought could be useful. So I will be supporting that today, and I appreciate the simpler definition.
All right, so version 2 is in front of us, and I want to keep our conversation to version 2 for now. Is there any other discussion on the motion for version 2? While it is considered a friendly amendment, I think for clarity's sake and just for the record, we should vote to add that if folks agree. All right, so Ms. Jalali moves amendment version 2. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion prevails.
6 in favor, none opposed. The public hearing will remain open and the ordinance is laid over to April 6th for final adoption.
All right, so we're going to, just a quick adjustment to that. We'll just accept that amendment for now, and then we will hold our public hearing. We added a step. We're good. All right, so the version 2 is what is in front of us, and we are opening up this public hearing to folks who are here in the chambers first. You have 2 minutes. I know I've said this before, but give us your name. Let us know where you live. When you're done testifying, please sign at the clipboards on the sides of the table. And I would just also remind folks that we do have people here to testify on the phone as well. The item in front of us is about the definitions in version 2, which has just been voted on by the council. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Julia Marley. I live in Cathedral Hill, Ward 2, District 17. When the rent stabilization ordinance was passed, one thing people started talking about is maybe landlords will create loopholes around the law by creating extra fees and saying that it's not rent. And this is happening to me right now. I got a 3% rent increase, and at the same time, my landlord is requiring that I sign an addendum to the lease agreeing to pay a separate fee for utilities which were covered by the rent under my original lease. Now, the reason that's a rent increase is because something is being taken out of the rent, I'm paying a separate fee for that, and the rent is not going down. My favorite part of the addendum I'm supposed to sign says, the amounts due for utilities are not additional rent, because they know exactly what they're doing. We need a definition of rents that is more consistent than whatever a landlord puts into a contract. If someone, has to sign something to keep staying in their house, they're probably going to, but it doesn't make it right, and the council should be able to, the city should be able to see through that and to have a working definition to avoid these kinds of loopholes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I'm stepping in for Council President for just a moment, so thank you so much, and welcome. Come on up.
Do I start? Okay. Hi, thank you, council members and council president Bremen. My name is Mai Chaveng. I am a renter and caregiver for my family who rent on the east side of St. Paul. I'm here to state my strong support for Ordinance 22-16. May 1st is just about a month away, and as a city, we need to move forward together on the implementation for rent stabilization policy that voters passed. Take this off. Ordinance 22-16, brought forward by CM Jalali, will help create the clarity that we need to move forward on implementation. The ordinance sets definitions for terms like rent and landlord. When creating these definitions, city staff reviewed over 180 cities with rent stabilization policies across the country to learn from ensure that we have our definitions of keeping with legal precedent, and we are borrowing from what's been proven to work. My family knows all too well the need for rent stabilization and a strong implementation process. Last year, the out-of-state landlord increased the rent from $1,350 to $1,850, a 37% increase, which has caused huge financial burdens and stress for my family. I've heard some council members express concerns about the unintended consequences of this policy for renters. But what my family story told me is that we need more tools in our toolkit, not less, and rent stabilization is an incredible foundation to build from. Of course, we need to build more affordable housing. We need to revive tenant protections like the Safe Housing Ordinance passed in 2020. We especially need rent stabilization to keep people in our communities, because without people, there is no community. Thank you to council members Jalali for taking the lead, recognizing the urgency of this situation and moving this forward. Oh, I ask all council members to vote yes.
Thank you.
Council President Bren Moen, council members. My name is Eric Foster. I live on 761 3rd Street East in Dayton's Bluff. And I'm also here to encourage you to adopt these ordinances. I am a property owner who provides housing units. I hate the term landlord and feel like we need to come up with a better term. It's so medieval. But I think that I'm congratulating all of you, since you've indicated for the most part that you're going to support this, on stepping into this sort of unknown future with those of us who supported this rent stabilization. I think that the clarity that will come from these definitions is something that we all really need as we move forward, and I thank you for providing that, and I thank particularly Councilmember Jalali for pushing this forward and support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name's Dan Crivet. I live at 2344 Doswell Avenue. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I concur that the rent stabilization ordinance as adopted by the voters needs a definition section, and I applaud your support for the proposed new language and now amended. The additional clarifying language includes definitions for housing services, landlord, rent, as now amended, and tenant, and should help accelerate the implementation of the ordinance as adopted by the voters. I understand there's a larger debate on other policy issues, larger policy issues, but those conversations are happening in separate and clearly defined other spaces. The task force is looking at long-term changes, for instance. What we're talking about today is implementation. At this time, we need the city to move forward with implementation of the ordinance pursuant to Minnesota statutes and to the city charter. As of today, it's been 141 days since November 2nd election when the ordinance was adopted. And there are merely 38 days left until it goes into effect on May 1st. I respectfully urge the City Council, the Mayor, and City staff to move forward with implementation on the ordinance as soon as possible. Further delay will only continue to frustrate all parties. The proposed language is well written and appears to have sound legal reasoning and research, and has been mentioned, it's been based on other cities' experience. As a former landlord and tenant, I know that explicitly clear language with unambiguous definitions are what is best for everyone. And it helps renters know their rights and helps the landlords know their operating parameters. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think you signed in, but in case you didn't, a reminder. Okay, I thought I saw you do that. Welcome.
Hi, Hi, I'll use a short one since I'm short. My name is Tram Huang. I live in Minneapolis, but I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Housing Justice Center here in downtown St. Paul, over in the Northwestern building. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm here representing the Housing Justice Center in naming our support for this ordinance because of the clarity and transparency it'll bring to thousands of residents across the city. With your vote last week to dedicate the funds to DSI to implement rent stabilization, you've ensured that things are moving forward, and this is a very logical and necessary next step in defining important terms so that the department can have terms to work with. It's the foundation that's necessary to get started on answering important questions, and we all have questions. It's our collective job to work together to answer them. I'm really hopeful to hear from all of you today that you're committed to answering these questions. We're already seeing from city staff's hard work in the past few months that they're also dedicated to playing their role. Organizations across the city, including mine and Homeline, are ready to help as well. And we're excited to get started with this process. I am also a member of the city's task force, and we've been a part of a co-learning process to learn about how other cities that have done this before us. And that's what I appreciate about this definition, about these set of definitions that are coming out, because these definitions are based off of what other cities have done. And so not only is there legal precedent, but there's also someone that we can lean on when we have questions. If we can ask those who have direct experience operating under these definitions. They can give us the, what we could have done differently advice. And I think that this clear definition is going to be not only easier to interpret, but avoids legal risks as well. I ask that you vote in support of this ordinance on April 6th so that we can get moving towards May 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have, I understand, 3 callers on the line. So I will move to Ms. Tripp. All right, it looks, Marvelyn, we're ready.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you, Council President Brimoen and Council. The first caller we have is Ed Stewart. Ed, you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please press *6 to unmute and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon again. My name is Ed Stewart, and I live at 1900 Goodrich in St. Paul, and I'm a leader with Isaiah. And again, I say, democracy and government do work. I'm proud of our city staff and Councilmember Jalali for drafting legal definitions of rent stabilization terms and conditions needed for implementation. Kudos to them. To mitigate risk, they borrowed definitions created by other cities that have working rent stabilization implementation as the basis for this ordinance. Moving forward with these definitions and with implementation will provide the protection that renters are rightfully due, especially given the election results. Rent stabilization is an important tool in the housing crisis that St. Paul faces. Keep the vision alive of a city where renters can live in safety and stability. Please vote yes on Ordinance 22-16 on April 6th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Our next caller is Jenny DeLuca. Jenny, can you press *6 to unmute yourself? You'll have 2 minutes to begin your 2 minutes to testify.
Hello again. My name is Jenny DeLuca. I live in Ward 4, and I'm a leader with Isaiah. Last November, citizens of St. Paul, no matter our race, zip code, or whether we're renters or homeowners, voted to pass rent stabilization. I urged the City Council to pass Ordinance 22-16 on April 6th. It is critical that DSI be given authority to define terms within the rent stabilization ordinance to ensure a consistency of language and to advance clarity to staff, council members, and the public about implementation of rent stabilization. I'm grateful that we can learn from each other and from cities to shape these definitions. I'm thankful to Councilmember Jalali for bringing this ordinance forward. Council members, please respect those of us who voted to pass rent stabilization and vote yes on Ordinance 2216 on April 6th so that we can continue to advance rent stabilization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Our last caller is Betsy Brayman. Betsy, you will have 2 minutes to testify. Please press *6 to unmute and begin your testimony.
Hi, again, my name is Betsy and I live in Ward 3 and I'm also an Isaiah leader. Thank you for allowing me to address you with respect to Ordinance 2216. Everyone, regardless of income, race, or wealth, deserves a place to call home that they can depend on and feel safe in. I believe city staff were diligent and thoughtful in establishing these definitions. They recognized that it wasn't necessary to recreate the wheel, and over 180 cities and states across the country have passed a rent stabilization policy before. We are fortunate to learn from what they have done, and that's exactly what city staff did. They looked at definitions used in these cities, and in doing so, they were able to provide definitions with legal precedent. This is what's possible when we're operating from a spirit of learning. This is what's possible when we trust that St. Paul residents deserve to have a civic say about our lives and how our families, communities, state, and country are governed and cared for. This is one of the most sacred freedoms St. Paulites should be able to experience. In honor of the will of the voters and actually implementing this policy towards May 1st, I'm asking the Council to pass Ordinance 2216 on April 6th and amend the legislative code. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Council President Brimmelman and Council. All testifiers have testified for Ordinance 22-16.
All right, Ms. Jalali moves to close the public hearing. And oh, excuse me, we are going to continue the public hearing. Would that require a vote, though? A vote to continue the public hearing? All right, so we will continue the public hearing till April 6th for final consideration and vote. That's what I was telling you about, how we just get there and then we don't vote for it. It's kind of weird, but we will. There's a lot of support at this table. Any thoughts before we move on? Ms. Jalali.
I believe that's our rent stabilization public hearings for the day. So I know that you all have been very patiently and committedly sitting there, and I just want to say thank you again. It's really, really clear to me every time these come before a vote or for public comment that our community is very invested in this policy succeeding. You might read otherwise in certain places and written by certain people, but we are committed to it, all of us. So thank you for holding us accountable to that commitment, and we'll be here, we'll be taking your words to heart. And personally, I brought these ordinances because I support them. I think we're hearing strong support around this table for them, so onward. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Ms. Jalali. And just really underscoring the fact that I think everyone at this table recognizes that the vote occurred in November. We are ready to do the work that we need to do to implement the rent stabilization ordinance as it is presented to us. And we also recognize that there's still work to do. In spite of some folks around this table concern in advance, there has been no dissension around the fact that it passed and we have work to do and we're ready to do it. So I'm underscoring what you said. Appreciate the folks that came here to testify virtually and in person and your continued engagement in this process. And we will bring this back before the council on the 6th of April when we convene again for a final vote.
Item 23 is now before you for a public hearing. Resolution 22-55, approving the application of Macalester College for a sound level variance in order to present live amplified sound on April 16th, 2022 at 125 Snelling Avenue South.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to the sound level variance item before us? Welcome.
Hello, Council President, Council members. My name is Andy Williams. I'm a resident of Ward 1, and I'm the director of the program board at Macalester. Just coming to speak on behalf of this. Springfest is an annual tradition on our campus, and just similar to past years, having an outdoor concert and wanting to make sure that we're respectful neighbors and also able to give our students and opportunity to celebrate after a rough couple of years for us and everyone. I don't know if there's any questions or if you need any additional information, but thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. We're really excited to be passing sound level variances. So it's like, yes, do it.
Sorry, this is my first year doing it too, so I wasn't sure if I was supposed to come up or just sit at the side and wait. So sorry.
No, thank you for being here. And I think typically, unless we've heard dissent in advance, that it is more and more rare that we have complaints. I think as speakers have gotten better, back in my day, the speakers were like 50 feet tall and 50 feet wide and had like no directional capacity, just deafening capacity. And now really it has become so much more manageable. So it's great to have you here, but normally you wouldn't have to wait for 2 hours.
Okay, I wasn't sure, so I just didn't want to. Again, being new in this role, I didn't want to cause an issue that comes up down the road. So sorry.
When you stood up, I saw your Argyle, and I'm like, oh, he's here from McAllister. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. All right, anyone here to testify on this item? Mr. Tolbert? Or no?
Just make a motion to close the
All right,
public hearing and get the party started.
All right. So Mr. Tolbert will be there. He's moving to close the public hearing and approve. Any final discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, none opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 24 is now before you as a public hearing. Resolution 22-61. Final order to consider the construction of the new Kellogg and 3rd Street Bridge and acquisition of necessary property rights.
And are we looking for a staff report on this item?
I requested an hour-long staff report, just kidding.
So is that
But Bruce is here if there are any questions.
All right, so
Appreciate it.
Mr. Engelbrecht is here if there are questions on this item. If not, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Ms. Naker moves to close the public hearing and approve, and thank Mr. Engelbrecht for being here. Any discussion on the motion?
And Brett is here too.
We are grateful, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, none opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted.
Mr. Tolbert moves suspension of the rules. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
The suspension item before you is Resolution 22-408, resolution from council to rent stabilization stakeholder group.
Mr. Tolbert.
Yeah, thank you, and I apologize in advance for bringing this in under suspension, but we wanted to get this passed as the Cura Rent Stabilization Group that has been referred to many times today moves from learning soon to deliberations, discussions, and this resolution does a couple things. As we know, the Cura Group has been tasked with helping the city improve the ordinance that was passed by voters last November. And this resolution will hopefully bring some clarity to what the council is looking for from the Cura Group to report back before we have to do any work on things. And it will also add additional thing where the Cura Group can look at what a new construction exemption should look like as we work for improving this ordinance in the future. So I think this will be helpful for the group as the council member who is the representative of this council on the group. I think this will help bring some clarity and guidance to the group of what would be helpful. And like I said, I apologize for bringing this just under suspension. I was working with everyone here to try and get as much into it as we could. So it should be in there, and I ask for your support.
All right, so this item is listed under suspension items, and I do appreciate the effort to get it in as soon as possible. When we have a fifth Wednesday no meeting, there's always a little bit of a rush at the end. And I want to speak in support of your resolution, namely because I think at the end of the rent stabilization group's conversations, I want to have clear direction on where we should be headed. And so this, to me, it helps really define what things we must know in order to make any adjustments or improvements or not to the ordinance as exists. I don't think there's any argument that it can be improved. It can be, that there is room for improvement. So I do think that being clear what we're looking for from the group, one way or the other, is extremely helpful, and I'm supportive of the resolution that you're bringing in. Other comments on this item? Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Tolbert working on this to try to collect some consensus from this council. We don't all have the same exact views on rent stabilization, but this work group exists, and my understanding of the intention of the resolution is to express essentially the consensus position of the council on what we do hope to get out of it. So for that reason, I am supportive, also because I appreciate Councilmember Tolbert including language that I personally care about and that I think other councilors care about, related to looking to the work group for guidance on best practices for community education to ensure renters are empowered to understand their rights and to access them. Small property owners, large property owners, whatever size of landlord you are, understand what they need to do to be in compliance. There's also reference to how to do a new construction exemption. I think it's important to clarify my own position that I am personally still working to understand whether and how we should do one in our community based on all the available data. We have heard loud and clear from the developer and investor community and folks who build housing in our community, which is important, and that investment matters for our city's health overall, that they want an exemption. And I am looking to hear from the rest of the work group, the rest of the many, many community members who are not in that conversation right now and deserve to be, and the continued discussion about it. I also think that needs to be informed by the best available data that we have. Looking at what's happening before we've even implemented an ordinance doesn't make sense to me as a basis for policymaking, but looking at what we learned this year and how we set it up to succeed and improve on it, and then looking at information about what is being built in our community and how we can support that, that is something I'm willing to look at. And I think that should follow a process like anything else. And I think that the KIRA work group is well positioned to help be a part of that. So with that, additionally, if we are going to talk about that policy, I think it's important to talk about what protections do renters get in those buildings. If you live in a newly constructed building, we don't have safe housing policy agenda in our community anymore. We fought really hard for those tenant protections, and now they're gone. So what protections do renters get if we come to a place where in a future rent stabilization policy, those buildings aren't subjected to the cap? I think that's something that we should have to answer as policymakers and make sure that we are making sure people have those protections. Additionally, there's anti-displacement work that needs to happen alongside new construction, and that's a combination of tenant protections. Other cities have pushed for and adopted inclusionary zoning policies. That's something this council has talked about for a long time, to make sure that new construction meets a range of affordability with all the tools we have in our toolkit. So there's a lot of pieces to it, but I think it's worth talking about all that. Sometimes the public discourse feels like ping pong. It's this side and that side, and they're batting back and forth. And I am personally committing to a much more thoughtful, less reactive discussion. That is my hope for where we get to. I think that you're seeing that in the implementation conversation, but I hope for that to be echoed as we advance this resolution and get to the next stages of that work. So those are the comments I wanted to make as we move this forward, since personally I contributed some effort into building on what Councilmember Tolbert put together, and I appreciate his acceptance of those changes.
Great. Are there other comments on this item? All right, so there's a motion from Mr. Tolbert. No further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, none opposed. The resolution is adopted. Legislative hearing consent agenda items 25 through 56 are before you for your consideration.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mormont.
Good afternoon, Council President Brenmo, council members. There is one person that I'm aware is here to testify, and that is for item number 28 to be read into the record.
Item number 28, legislative hearing 22-1, making finding on the appealed substantial abatement ordered for 318 Edmond Avenue in Council File RLHRR 21-11.
All right, and we'll begin with the staff report.
Yes. What the resolution is in front of you is a resolution, let me restate this. You passed a resolution 6 months ago granting a period of 180 days for this property to be rehabilitated. It is our practice at the 6-month mark, at the end of the time you granted, to revisit and find out whether or not the nuisance condition at the property was abated. If it was not abated, the council needs to make some choices about where we go from here. In this particular case, the property has not been completely rehabilitated. It has been deemed less than 50% rehabilitated, according to our building official. In these situations, I ask the City Council sometimes to forfeit the existing $5,000 performance deposit. I always ask the council, ask that there be revised rehabilitation plans. Clearly, the plans that were adopted 6 months ago are no longer relevant. The deadlines have been passed. We don't know if there's money still there to finish the project and so on. All of that needs updating. And in this particular case, it appears that there's a different funding source that's also being used. When reviewing this, because it's at the less than 50% mark, I am recommending that you not forfeit the existing $5,000 performance deposit, but rather require that an additional $5,000 performance deposit be posted. If the work is done within 6 months and the other conditions are met, the full $10,000, of course, would be returned. This just creates a larger carrot in order for the work to be more likely completed. At this juncture, I do not have those conditions met. So I can tell you that the nuisance condition is not abated and the conditions under which I would recommend an additional grant of time have not been met. The owner is not here. The owner is represented and has been represented throughout the process by his mother, who is doing the rehabilitation on the property. She has done other rehabilitations, Category 3 vacant buildings and Category 2 as well. So this is not a first experience. In fact, quite recently, the council made a finding that after 1 year of working on a rehabilitation at 657 Sherburne Avenue, she did complete that project, and that house nuisance condition was abated. She should be receiving the $5,000 performance deposit back on that property presently. The reason articulated in the legislative hearing that she does not want to or have her son post the $5,000 performance deposit has to do with the intra-family dynamics, and I cannot take that into account in this. This is the recommendation that an additional $5,000 be posted is consistent with the way we treat other properties that are similarly situated. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. So you said this person who's here to testify is not the owner. She's making a request about the $5,000, but is she the legal representative on this property, or is there any reason why we should be entertaining these offers at all?
In the legislative hearing process, we often do deal in a more informal way with representatives of properties. She has represented her son on another property, I believe on Galtier. And we have received and reviewed paperwork on financing from her son. His name is Udam T, and her name is Aishwin T. No, we do not have her assigned as legal representative in the paperwork, but she has been speaking on his behalf. That is a question that you may want to have nailed down moving forward, though.
Okay. I haven't heard that before, so I just wanted to be clear. What
we tend to operate a little bit more informally because we have so many different kinds of situations that come at us where friends or siblings and so on are there with the person. Yes.
Okay. Are there other questions from Ms. Mormont? Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. Ms. Mormont, can you clarify again what your recommendation is for this?
At this juncture, without the conditions being met, I would recommend that the resolution be amended for the property to be removed. I think that would be unfortunate, and that a better outcome would be that the city council determine that those conditions need to be met and revisit the matter in 2 weeks' time. And if they have been met, at that juncture, give a grant of 180 days. But to hear out Ms. T, what her argument is, and then incorporate that into the resolution for consideration in 2 weeks. Again, additional $5,000 performance deposit, revised work plans, and confirmation of available financing being the 3 key items that we're looking for at this juncture.
Thank you. Any other questions from Ms. Mormon? Good. All right, thank you. This is a public hearing. If you'd like to testify on this item, please come up, introduce yourself, let us know where you live, and you can share your perspective.
My name is Aishinti, you know me. I live in 657 Sherburne, just moved in.
Can you just step like 6 inches? There you are. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, moved in. As she talked about my 657 Sherburne, I have kicked out from my house for 5 years. I just get in this month. All the time I come in,
Are you talking about 318 Edmond, or are you talking about a different property?
657 Sherburne, because she talked about my 657 Sherburne.
Okay.
I got all the, could I talk about that or no?
No, well, I just want you to use your time wisely. You have 4 minutes going, so I'm going to pause this here.
Okay. If I don't have time, I don't know, because
I'd like you to just focus on the Edmond Avenue address, just so we make sure we hear what you have to say about Edmond Avenue, because that's what's in front of us today, okay?
I represent my son because he's not, he's 45, 50 years old, but I take care of him. He's not good to take care of this. That's why I'm 66 years old. I helping him. And the house, the Ms. Merman, the last time I talked to her, she said she approved not to take $5,000. And then 3 minutes later, she said she changed. She changed her. How can she do like that? That's all I asking. We pour $5,000 for him. He had no job. This is 6 years. That house, to try to move in, to stay. Any government right now, or the renter, government help to pay. That he asking to fixing, to get in to his house. She want another $5,000. That I asking her that he had no job. He know that I helping him, because in this 25 years you never see him, because he's you know what I mean. He's not good to come and do all this stuff. And I just try to help him, but I don't think I'm a good helping him either. I just suffering him. But this the last time I asking him to finish the job. When the last time that he had my lawyer come and he talked for him, Mrs. Merman tell me, stay on the phone. When it's my turn, she will calling me. But when the lawyer talk everything, my turn, she don't calling me, I cannot asking. Because if give five months not enough to fix all this stuff. Because arrangement, when the people, they do work, they have their job, and then when approved, they said 2 months, I will come to do for you. When they ready to do, all problem come up. And the people that working, bad luck, the guy that work for plumbing, his brother died, his wife died, in two in his family the same. I have made complaint too to him. I said, please help, but what can I say? The whole family, I know him too many years, But for now, I am asking to the time to fixing and finish this, because it's been 4 or 5 years already. Any government will be help people to move in the house. Why she cannot allow?
Thank you.
And I rent apartment, everything is me. I had to pay for. Why I need to pay for him? He qualified for disability, everything, but I cover everything because I don't want him to one that say crazy, my son. But now, no, he need help. I asking to help him. That's all the time to ask to work. Now the people are hitting everything, asking to work. She said, hold. But, you know, for me, it's very hard because I got a problem. I'm in the war. I got stuck when I see evil. I got stuck. I don't know what to say.
Well, can I just, before you run out of time, can I just ask, did you have an ask, a specific?
I asking, she said, Mr. Asking to fix the play, you know. He already post 5,000 already, 2021, he want 5,000. When the people can move in? I lose my house because I'm not smart. It's not I do wrong thing. People come to my house and all the inspector, I need you to review them. They cannot hurt the people that work hard. Like that, I out from my house for 5 years. How I feel? And I'm a work hard. I don't ask nobody to help. 5 years come to my house and cause the problem. Just come to asking to get into my house to see. No harm to you. And then another inspector come and he said, you the landlord, and then I will kick you out. He promised he's right. He kicked me out for 5 years.
Okay.
I would like you to ask to see this inspector that do like that with the good people. No drug, no anything. You know, I out from my house for 5 years. This one my problem. And then she want 5,000. How can I don't have money.
Okay,
I owe the
so
place.
I think I heard what your ask is.
You know.
Okay, so Mr. Tao is going to move to close the public hearing. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion prevails. Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. Ms. Teet, thanks for coming down to make your case. And I am very empathetic about your experience with you and your family. And I'm proud that you are a business person and that you choose to invest in St. Paul, and you are taking these home and you're rehabbing. You're very experienced
but
doing that.
And that's
so
experience for me.
you were here, you heard the whole testimony today about rent stabilization and how important it is for us to have homes for everyone. And so you are a solution. You're a solution. Your business is a solution to some of the folks in our community that need housing. So I want you to know that I really appreciate that about you. 180 days, it's a long time for any business to rehab and to get the work done. If this is your first rehab, then I would consider it. It might be challenging, but this is not your first home.
Could I say?
Let me finish.
My rehab plan.
Ma'am, the public hearing is closed.
Sorry.
So I think it's very fair by the hearing officer to allow you additional 2 weeks, okay, for you to go back to your plan and to update your plan, because 180 days has passed. A lot has changed in 180 days. So, and I don't know what's going on inside the property, especially if you involve electricals and other infrastructure that could be dangerous and hazardous. So I'm very empathetic towards you and your situation, but I think it's very fair to give you 2 weeks for you to work with your contractor and any other issue that you need to deal with to provide enough evidence to the hearing officer, and I think at that point we can make a decision. Also understand that when you put $5,000 into this project, it's good for you because you're going to get that money back, but it also shows us that you're serious and you're going to get the work done. Okay?
I don't got back with my house.
And so that is what I have to say.
Yeah.
All right,
But
so so Mr. Tao is going to move the recommendation of the legislative hearing officer. If we have a question for you, we'll let you know. But I think we have to deliberate among ourselves.
could I
Okay.
just say one word?
No.
I already give her the paper.
No, and it sounds like the recommendation is going to be that you have 2 weeks to get a plan together.
Right.
And so during those 2 weeks, you can sure reach out to Mr. Tao, to any of us, to Ms. Mormont. That's fine, but now the public hearing's closed. So we're going to deliberate and vote. And I would encourage you, if this passes, to take advantage of the 2 weeks to make your statements to folks. So there's a motion from Mr. Tao. Any discussion on Mr. Tao's motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion prevails. All
Six
right. Yep.
6 in favor, none opposed. The motion is passed, is adopted.
All right.
I'm not aware of another person being here to testify this afternoon. There might be.
Okay. All right, so with that, we are having a public hearing for legislative hearing consent agenda items 25 through 56, save item number 28. Is there anyone here to testify on these items? Seeing none, Ms. Yang moves to close the public hearings and approve. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, none opposed. The public hearings are closed, and the consent agenda is adopted as amended.
So it's been a long one, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least offer folks to share news or information from the wards before we adjourn. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? Ms. Jalali.
I would like to just thank and appreciate Tom for stepping in and being our reader. And we picked the hardest day for you to do it because you're one of the strongest soldiers. So thank you. Nice work.
Yeah, here. Thank you for stepping into this is probably our most real meeting in 2 years. It's crazy. Good stuff. I will just remind people that we passed legislative wards and precincts and polling locations today, which is exciting. So we should share that news out with our community members and let them know where the changes are. Even though we don't have an actual election per se for our council offices until next year. But I think just saying hello to our new constituents would be a fun outreach approach. But today, those polling locations were set, precincts were set. Big stuff has happened in St. Paul. Great meeting. Any other thoughts, comments, news from the wards? All right, seeing none, gratitude has been expressed. We are adjourned.